Imagine a world where rockets land back on Earth, electric cars drive the future, and impossible ideas suddenly become reality. When we hear the name Elon Musk, we usually think about innovation, ambition, and changing the world. But today, I want to talk about something different, something more human. Recently, Keanu Reeves revealed a name that sparked curiosity and questions everywhere. Whose name is it? Why does it matter? And what does it tell us about the emotions behind the minds of extraordinary people? Because even the greatest innovators, the people who dream about Mars and the future of humanity, still experience the most powerful force on Earth: love. So today, let's explore a story where genius meets emotion, where ambition meets the heart, and where one revealed name might change how we see Elon Musk forever. Sometimes a single name can change the atmosphere of an entire room. A name spoken quietly, yet it carries the weight of 1,000 memories. Recently, a name surfaced, not shouted, not announced with celebration, but revealed in a way that made people pause and wonder. Whose name is it? Why does it matter? And why do we suddenly feel that behind the noise of fame and ambition, there is a very human story waiting to be understood? Because names are never just sounds. A name can be a promise. A name can be a memory. A name can be the echo of someone who once changed the direction of your life without even realizing it. We often look at powerful people and assume their lives are made of steel, strong, unbreakable, always moving forward. We imagine that success replaces emotion, that ambition replaces tenderness. But the truth is very different. Even the strongest minds carry quiet moments in their hearts. Even those who build the future sometimes look back at the past and remember the name that once made their world feel lighter. A name can arrive in your life like a sunrise you didn't expect. At first, it's just a word, just a person, passing through your story. But slowly that name begins to hold meaning. It becomes the voice that encourages you when the world feels heavy. It becomes the face you remember when things finally start to go right. And without realizing it, that name becomes part of your journey. Sometimes love doesn't appear in dramatic moments. It doesn't always arrive with fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes it appears quietly, in the middle of ordinary days. A conversation that lasts longer than expected. A smile that stays in your thoughts for hours. A moment where two people realize that something simple has suddenly become important. And when that happens, the name of that person begins to live in your mind differently. It's no longer just a name you hear in conversation. It becomes a name you carry with you when you walk through difficult moments. A name that reminds you that no matter how complicated the world becomes, there was once someone who made everything feel simple again. But life still has its own rhythm. People move, dreams grow larger, responsibilities become heavier, the road stretches further than anyone imagined, and sometimes the name that once felt so close becomes a quiet memory sitting somewhere in the background of your life, not forgotten, just resting. Because real love doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it simply transforms into something quieter, something deeper. It becomes respect, gratitude, or a silent appreciation for the role someone played in your story. You might hear that name years later and suddenly remember the way life felt when everything was new. When hope was easy, when the future seemed wide open and every step forward felt like an adventure. That is the strange power of a name. It can bring the past into the present with a single whisper, and that's why when people hear that a name has been revealed, curiosity begins to grow. Not because of gossip, not because of headlines, but because everyone understands the quiet mystery behind it. Everyone has had a name like that at some point in their life, a name that carries a piece of their heart. We may build companies, chase dreams, explore new frontiers, and push the limits of what humanity can achieve. We may travel further than anyone before us, but no matter how far we go, there is always a small part of us that remembers the people who shaped the beginning of the journey. Because success can change your life, but it doesn't erase the names that once meant everything, and maybe that's what makes this moment so fascinating. Somewhere, in the middle of ambition and progress, a single name appeared again, quietly reminding everyone that behind every powerful story, there are human connections that shaped it long before the world was watching. Maybe that name belongs to someone who believed in a dream before it became real. Maybe it belongs to someone who offered kindness during a difficult chapter. Maybe it belongs to someone who simply stood there, at the right moment in time, and reminded a restless mind what it means to feel understood. Because love doesn't always try to control the future. Sometimes it simply walks beside you for a while and leaves something meaningful behind. And that's why the question still lingers in the air, gentle but powerful at the same time. A name has been revealed, but whose name is it? Keynote 2, The Quiet Power of a Single Name. Keynote 3, When Ambition Meets the Memory of Love. Keynote 4, The Invisible People Behind Every Great Journey. The quiet power of a single name is something most people underestimate. We live in a world full of noise, millions of words spoken every minute, endless conversations, endless opinions, endless stories. Yet somehow, among all those sounds, one simple name can rise above everything and change the way a moment feels. A name is not just language, it's emotion wrapped inside a few letters. It's memory hiding inside a sound. When someone says a certain name, the mind doesn't just hear it, it travels. It goes back to places, to moments, to feelings that once shaped who we became. Think about it for a second. There are names we hear every day that mean almost nothing to us. They pass by like strangers walking down a busy street. But then there are a few names that carry weight. Names that slow down our thoughts for a moment. Names that make our hearts react before our minds even understand why. That's the quiet power a name can hold. Some names remind us of kindness. Some remind us of lessons. Some remind us of moments where life felt simple, even if the world around us was complicated. And sometimes, one name reminds us of love, not the loud kind of love people often talk about, not the dramatic stories you see in movies or hear in grand speeches, but the quiet kind, the kind that exists in small gestures, in silent support, in the presence of someone who understands you without needing many words. When a name carries that kind of meaning, it becomes something different. It becomes part of your inner world, a symbol of a chapter of your life that mattered. People who chase big dreams often move very fast. Their lives become a constant motion of ideas, risks, decisions, victories, and failures. They look forward because they have to. The future demands their attention every single day. But even in a life that moves at that speed, certain memories stay still. Certain names remain untouched by time. Because no matter how much success someone achieves, no matter how far they travel or how high they rise, there are always a few quiet moments where they remember the people who once stood beside them before the world started paying attention. Sometimes those people were friends, sometimes mentors, sometimes strangers who offered a few words that changed everything. And sometimes they were someone whose presence felt different from everyone else. Someone whose name carries warmth even years later. That doesn't always mean the story lasted forever. Life rarely follows perfect paths. People grow, directions change, and time moves forward whether we want it to or not. But the meaning of those connections doesn't disappear just because the road continued. A single name can represent courage during uncertain days. It can represent the calm voice that reminded someone to keep going when doubt appeared. It can represent a smile that arrived during a moment when the future felt unclear. And that's why when a name appears again, especially a name that was once private, it creates curiosity. Not because people are searching for drama, but because they recognize something universal inside the moment. Everyone has experienced the quiet power of a name at least once in their life. Maybe it was the name of someone who believed in them before they believed in themselves. Maybe it was the name of someone who saw their potential when the rest of the world was too busy to notice. Maybe it was simply the name of someone who made ordinary days feel meaningful. When you hear that name again after a long time, something interesting happens inside your mind. You remember not only the person, but also the version of yourself that existed during that time. The dreams you were chasing, the fears you were facing, the hopes you were carrying. A name can unlock all of that in a single second, and that's why a quiet revelation can feel so powerful. Not because of fame, not because of headlines, but because behind that moment is a reminder that every great journey is built on human connections that the world rarely sees. People often think greatness is created only by intelligence, effort, and ambition. Those things matter, of course, but they are not the whole story. Behind every remarkable path, there are invisible influences. People who offered encouragement, people who inspired courage, people who changed the direction of a life simply by being present at the right moment. Sometimes those influences fade into history, unknown to the public. Their names are never spoken outside a small circle of memories. But every once in a while, one of those names rises back to the surface, and suddenly everyone starts wondering about the story behind it. Not because they want to invade a private world, but because they understand something deeply human about the situation. Because somewhere in their own life, they also remember a name that once meant everything to them. Ambition has a strange rhythm. It pushes people forward with incredible force, demanding focus, discipline, and endless energy. When someone decides to chase a dream bigger than themselves, their world becomes filled with movement, long nights, bold decisions, risks that most people would never take. The road becomes intense, unpredictable, sometimes lonely. And in that constant motion, people often believe that emotions must step aside to make room for progress. They imagine that ambition and love cannot exist in the same space. That one must disappear for the other to survive. But life rarely follows such simple rules, because even the most determined minds carry memories that quietly walk beside them. Memories of people who appeared during the early stages of the journey, long before success arrived, long before recognition changed the atmosphere around them. Those moments matter more than most people realize. When a dream is still fragile, when the future is uncertain, and the path forward feels almost impossible, the presence of another person can still mean everything. A few words of belief, a conversation during a difficult night, a reminder that the struggle is worth it. Sometimes that support comes from friendship, sometimes it comes from family, and sometimes it comes from someone whose presence feels different, someone who brings warmth into a life that is otherwise focused entirely on building something extraordinary. In those moments, ambition doesn't disappear, the dream doesn't become smaller, but something new appears beside it. A sense of balance. A reminder that life is not only about reaching distant goals but also about the connections formed along the way. The interesting thing about people who chase massive dreams is that they rarely slow down. Their minds are constantly moving toward the next idea, the next challenge, the next possibility. Even when they care deeply about someone, their path can remain demanding and unpredictable. And that's where life sometimes becomes complicated, because love often asks for time, presence, and stillness, three things that ambition doesn't always allow. So the journey continues. The dream grows larger. Responsibilities multiply. The world begins to watch more closely, and slowly, the distance between moments of quiet connection becomes wider, not because the feeling disappears, but because the direction of life keeps pulling forward. Yet something fascinating happens with time. Even when years pass and the world changes completely, certain memories remain untouched by the noise of success. They stay exactly the way they were when they first happened. A conversation on a quiet evening, a laugh shared during a stressful day, a simple moment when two people looked at each other and understood something without needing to explain it. Those memories do not compete with ambition. They simply exist beside it, quietly reminding a person of the humanity behind their achievements. Because no matter how advanced technology becomes, no matter how powerful innovation grows, the human heart still values the same simple things it always has: understanding, kindness, connection. And sometimes the memory of those things is carried inside a single name, a name that once meant comfort during uncertain times, a name that represented someone who saw the person behind the dream, not just the dream itself. For people who live in the public eye, most of their story becomes visible to everyone. Their victories are celebrated, their failures are discussed, their decisions are analyzed endlessly, but there are always parts of their lives that remain quiet, protected by time and privacy, the small chapters that shaped them before the spotlight appeared. Every once in a while, a glimpse of those chapters returns to the surface. Not as a full story, not as a detailed explanation, but as something simple and mysterious, a single name. And suddenly the world begins to wonder about the connection behind it. Not because people want to turn it into drama, but because they recognize something universal inside the moment. Everyone understands what it means to carry a memory of someone who once mattered deeply. Someone who may not be standing beside them today, but whose influence still echoes quietly in the background of their life. That's the strange meeting point between ambition and love. One pushes a person toward the future with unstoppable energy. The other stays behind in certain moments of the past, glowing softly like a memory that refuses to fade. And sometimes, when the world least expects it, that memory appears again in the form of a name spoken out loud after years of silence. Behind every remarkable journey, there are people the world never sees. History often focuses on achievements, milestones, inventions, and victories. It celebrates the visible moments, the launches, the breakthroughs, the bold decisions that reshape industries and inspire millions. But rarely does it stop to look at the quieter influences that existed before. Still, those moments became headlines. Because long before success becomes public, a journey is deeply personal. It begins in uncertain places. Small rooms filled with ideas, long nights where doubt feels stronger than confidence, moments where the future seems distant and fragile at the same time. During those early chapters, the world is not watching yet. There are no cameras, no applause, no global recognition. There are only a few people who witness the struggle from close enough to understand it. Still, those people become silent parts of the story. They might not design the inventions or lead the companies, but they might not lead the companies themselves. But they shape something equally important: the emotional environment around the person who is trying to build something extraordinary. Sometimes they offer encouragement when everything feels uncertain. Sometimes they bring laughter into a life that has become too serious. Sometimes they simply listen during the moments when the weight of ambition feels overwhelming. And often, they never will ask for recognition in return. Their presence exists quietly, like background music that gives meaning to a scene without demanding attention. The world usually learns about the big achievements later. The headlines talk about innovation, determination, intelligence, and vision. All of those things are real and important, but they are not the complete picture, because behind every determined mind, there are human experiences that shape the way that person sees the world. Moments of friendship that taught loyalty, moments of challenge that taught resilience, moments of connection that reminded them why their work matters in the first place. Among those experiences, sometimes there is someone whose role feels especially meaningful, not necessarily because the relationship lasted forever, but because it arrived at exactly the right time, at a time when belief was needed, at a time when encouragement made the difference between continuing and giving up, at a time when life felt uncertain, enough that even a small amount of understanding became powerful. When someone appears in your life during a moment like that, their presence becomes tied to the beginning of your journey. Even if life eventually moves in different directions, that connection remains part of the foundation of who you became. People often assume that success replaces the past, that when someone reaches extraordinary heights, the earlier chapters fade away, but the truth is the opposite. Those early chapters will become even more meaningful with time, because when someone looks back after years of achievement, they remember not only the victories but also the people who existed during the days when nothing was guaranteed, the people who saw the dream before the world believed in it, the people who understood the person behind the ambition. Sometimes those individuals remain lifelong companions, sometimes they become distant memories, and sometimes their story is reduced to something incredibly simple: a single name remembered quietly in the middle of a much larger life story. That is why the appearance of a name can feel so intriguing. Not because the name itself is famous or dramatic, but because it hints at a hidden chapter behind a public journey. A reminder that even the most powerful paths are built from ordinary human connections. Everyone has people like that in their own life. Individuals who may not realize how deeply they influence someone's direction. A teacher who spoke a few encouraging words. A friend who stayed during a difficult moment, a person whose presence created warmth during a time when life felt uncertain. Those influences rarely appear in official biographies. They do not receive awards or recognition, yet their impact quietly echoes through every success that follows, because every great journey begins with human moments long before it becomes a global story. And sometimes, when the world hears a single name rising from the silence of those earlier chapters, it becomes a gentle reminder that behind ambition, innovation, and achievement, there were always people who helped shape the beginning of the path.